matan. Now the sanad is the chain of narration. And the matan is the actual words. So both of those things are scrutinized in order to determine the strength of the hadith. So according to Hafiz ibn Hajar al-Asqalani, as a proof in terms of the strength of the hadith, in terms of the chain of narration, in other words, the people who narrate the hadith from the Prophet ﷺ, from the Prophet ﷺ to a Sahabi, to a Tabi'i, to a Tabi'i, until it eventually came to those scholars, the Muhaddithun, who compiled the hadith, and also in terms of what is stated therein, this hadith he considers to be the strongest proof, for there being 2 sunnahs or 2 raka'ahs of sunnah salah before any of the fara'id salah. Then the next hadith, next proof also that is brought, is also reported by Ibn Abbas radiallahu ta'ala an, and we mentioned him here as well, as one of the famous Abdullahs. But what was unique about this Ibn Mas'ud that we mentioned last week? Who can remember? What did I say last week about Ibn Mas'ud? That in the science of narration of hadith, when you hear the name Abdullah, then it refers to Abdullah ibn Mas'ud. He's the only one who is generally referred to only by the name Abdullah. All of these other companions who also had the name Abdullah, like Abdullah ibn Abbas, Abdullah ibn Amr ibn As, Abdullah ibn Umar, they were all famous Abdullahs. But they will always be referred to as Abdullah ibn Abbas, Abdullah ibn Amr ibn As, Abdullah ibn Umar. They will never only be referred to as Abdullah. In terms of being the narrator of the hadith, the only person referred to as such is Abdullah ibn Mas'ud. Alright? And then you get the famous, kunya of Abu Abdullah. So Abu Abdullah, again, in the narration of hadith, if you come across the name and scholars speak and they say, Qala Abi Abdullah, Abu Abdullah said, then that refers to Imam Bukhari rahimahullah. And in the science of fiqh, if they say Qala Abu Abdullah said, then it refers to Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal rahimahullah. So these kind of titles, depending on the science of deen in which you are speaking, a specific name refers to a specific person. So you can have the same name, Abu Abdullah, but to know which person they are speaking about, you need to know which science they are speaking in, and only then you will know which person they are speaking about. Alright, so he mentions the hadith. He says that قال كان النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم يركع قبل الجمعة أربعا لا يفصل في شيء منهما وهذا وإن ضعفه العلماء لكن يشهد له الأحاديث الصحيحة التي قبله. So he says that Nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, this is now deen, this is D, and this is a hadith from Ibn Abbas. And he says that كان النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم يركع قبل الجمعة أربعا. He says that Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam used to make 4 rak'ats before the Jumu'ah Salah. Now, because another thing that is interesting about Abdullah ibn Abbas, besides that he is the mufassir of the ummah, he is the main tafsir for this ummah from amongst the Sahaba, because Nabi sallallahu made special dua for him. Another thing that is interesting about him is that his one maternal aunt was married to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. She was the wife of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So he used to take advantage of this because he was a young boy. So he used to take advantage of this to request to stay by his aunt. He would very often come there, then he would ask if he could stay there for the day, or if he could spend the night there. And why he did this? So that he could have insight into the personal home life of the Prophet ﷺ, and so that he could ask questions from Rasulullah ﷺ and from the wife was Maymuna. Maymuna, she was Maymuna and Hazrat Abdullah ibn Abbas's mother was sisters. So it was his maternal aunt. So he used to often go there, and that is why even we find a hadith about Nabi Sallam's tahajjud salah. He narrates a hadith about Nabi Sallam's tahajjud salah. And he narrates the hadith that he went to visit his aunt, and so it became night, and because he was a small boy, he asked, "Kan ek maar hier slaap vanaand?" Because it's his aunt. So Nabi Sallam said, "No problem," because it's his aunt, so there's no problem if he spends the night there. So he said, he stayed there to observe how Nabi Sallam spent Nabi Sallam's night. This was a small boy. A small boy, he wasn't mukallaf yet, but see his interest in acquiring the knowledge of deen. So in any way, he slept there. He said, so then Nabi Sallam got up. And he said that he mentions how Nabi Sallam's wife prepared the bedding for them, etc. They went to go lie down, he went to go lie down, and during the course of the night, Nabi Sallam got up, and then he also got up. So then Nabi Sallam went to go take wudu, and he also went to go take wudu. Then Nabi Sallam started with salah. And when Nabi Sallam started with the salah, he stood on the left side of Nabi Sallam. He stood on the left side of Nabi Sallam. Then Nabi Sallam grabbed him by the ear and pulled him to Nabi Sallam's right side. Nabi Sallam grabbed him by the ear and pulled him to Nabi Sallam's right side. And then he reports that Nabi Sallam stood in salah, and for 2 raka'ats of salah, Nabi Sallam read 5 juz of Quran. In 2 rak'ahs. So then he asked Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam to make dua for him. He asked Nabi Sallam to make dua for him. So Nabi Sallam made dua for him, and then after this Nabi Sallam said to him, "Fa'inuni bi kathrati salah." Help me to get the dua that I have made for you accepted. Nabi Sallam made the dua. Nou, ons dink, ons vra 'n pious persoon, "Sheikh, maak dua vir my." Dan dink ons is automatically accepted because hy sê hy het dua gemaak vir my. No, it's not like that. The Rasul of Allah made dua for him because on his request. But then Nabi Sallam said to him, "Fa'inuni, help me." Because Nabi Sallam asked him, "What do you want?" He said, "I want your company in Jannah." Nabi Sallam asked him, "What must I ask for?" He said, "I want your company in Jannah, O Rasulullah." Nabi Sallam said, "Okay, I will make that dua. However, you must also do something to get this dua accepted." Nabi said to him, "Fa'inuni bi kathrati salah." You must help me to get this dua accepted by doing an abundance of salah, referring to nafil salah. So we think we just ask a pious guy, en dan is ons nou klaar, hy het nou dua gemaak. No. We need to become deserving of that dua. So he wanted Nabi Sallam's company. This was after he stood up so long portion of time in salah with Nabi Sallam. Nabi Sallam again told him, make a lot of salah. So in any event, so Ibn Abbas says that Nabi Sallam made 4 raka'at before. And then he also mentions here, La yufassilu fi shay'in minhuma. Now what this literally means is that Nabi Sallam made 4 raka'ats with only 1 salam. Nabi Sallam made 2 raka'ats, and then like how we make Isha Salah. Nabi Sallam made these Sunnah Salah like Nabi Sallam made his Isha Salah. Now you will find that from amongst the Ahnaf, we as Shafi'is, we don't have Sunnah Salah 4 raka'at continuously with only 1 salam. We've got with the 2 tahiyas like how we make Isha Salah, we don't make Sunnah Salah like that. According to Shafi madhab, that 2 raka'ats with a salam, another 2 raka'ats, in other words, salam after every 2 raka'ats. However, the Ahnaf, they have got a practice of making Sunnah and Nafil Salah, where they can make 4 raka'ats like how we make the Isha Salah. So this is the kind of hadith upon which they rely. However, it is mentioned here that وَهَذَا, this hadith, وَإِنْ ضَعَفَهُ ulama. There are some ulama that say that this hadith is a weak hadith. Now, the weakness of this hadith is not in relation to making 4 raka'ats of salah. The weakness in this hadith is because somewhere in the chain of narration, there is some defect. Either the narrator is a weak narrator, or alternatively, there is some other weakness within the chain. So the ulama say that this is a weak hadith. So because this is a weak hadith, so this hadith is considered weak. So they say this is a weak hadith. So generally, if a hadith is weak, you cannot take it as a proof. You cannot take it as a proof for a compulsory deed. Then you can say that it is a weak hadith. So if you want to, you can practice on it, but that is not for fara'id. No? This is only for nafil salah. Because this is for a nafil salah. This, you can't make a hukum of fardiyat on a weak hadith. But for encouragement, like we have the fadail amal, people say, yeah, that's weak hadith. And yes, you can use weak hadith. Yeah? In fact, Imam Shafi rahimahullah has listed 5 conditions upon which in the usulul fiqh a person can use weak hadith, and if it is for the purpose of fadail, you can. However, what is also mentioned here, this hadith by itself is considered a weak hadith. Some ulama have considered weak. Lakin yashhadu lahu al-ahadith as-sahiha allati qablahu. However, these hadith here, this hadith here of Ibn Mas'ud making 4 raka'ats before and 4 raka'ats after, this is a sahih hadith. This hadith of there being 2 raka'ats of salah between, or establishing the principle of salah between every adhan and iqamah. Because between adhan and iqamah for dhuhr salah, how many raka'ats can you make? 4. Which means it is not that they must only, that you are limited only to 2 raka'ats before the fard salah between the adhan and iqamah. You can make 4 also. You can make 2, you can make 4. Yeah? Like in dhuhr, 2 is mu'akkada, 2 is ghair mu'akkada. But you can do all 4, or you can only do the 2 which is mu'akkada. But this hadith which says that there is between the adhan and iqamah of every salah, there is 2 rakats of salah, this is also a sahih hadith. And then that the hadith that there is no fard salah except before it is 2 rakats of salah, this is also a sahih hadith. In fact, as we mentioned, Ibn Hajar, he mentions regarding this hadith that it is considered in terms of the chain of narration to be the most authentic, the strongest chain, because of the people who are narrating this hadith. So now Ibn Abbas's hadith by itself is weak, but all of these ahadith are what is referred to as shawahid. Now what does shawahid means? Shawahid means that by itself the hadith is weak, but there are other hadith that contain similar statements to it, which are sahih. So it's like a crutch. You know, a man, sy bene is lekker nie, nou kan hy nie reg loop nie. Maar nou as jy vir hom 'n kurk gee, nou wat gebeur? Nou kan hy regop loop. So it is to say that these other hadith, they give strength. So this hadith might be weak by itself, but in terms of the classification of hadith, because of these shawa'id, this hadith can become Hasan Ghairi. Now what does Hasan Ghairi mean? The 3 main categories of accepted hadith is, I want to write it here. Number 1, Sahih. Number 2, Hasan. Number 3, Da'if. Da'if meaning weak. Now these are all 3 referred to as categories of maqbool. And maqbool means accepted. So you get hadith which are maqbool and hadith which are mardood. Maqbool means hadith accepted, mardood means hadith that become rejected. So these 3 fall within the category of accepted. Now, generally, the 3 become graded on the strength of the chain of narration. If there's no defect or shortcoming in the chain, it will be considered sahih. If there's a slight defect, it will be considered hasan. And if there's a greater defect, but not such a defect that we will reject the hadith and make it mardood, it stays within the category of maqbool. It is not a da'if jiddan hadith, or a mawdu hadith, but it is a weak hadith, but it is not a severe weakness, then such a hadith also becomes accepted. Now what happens is that if you have a hadith that is da'if in the one chain, and then you have a similar hadith with a, because that is what very often happens. A person, he will get the hadith and he will say, but this hadith is da'if. Because it doesn't mean that the whole hadith is da'if, it means the chain of narration is da'if. Then you will get exactly the same hadith narrated by different people, which are sahih. So the same hadith, in the one hand, so this is what you must understand about da'if and sahih. You can get exactly the same hadith. So for example, this hadith, between every adhan and iqamah, there's 2 rakats of salah. You can get that same wording in one hadith where it is da'if, and another hadith in which it is sahih. But the wording is the same. The matan, the wording is the same. Because the main criteria for the hadith being strong or the hadith being weak is the chain of narration. Because in the one chain, there's one guy that is a weak link. So because of him, it becomes weak. So it's not when we say a hadith is da'if, that the hadith in its entirety, we are actually speaking about the chain of narration. So in this case now, there is a hadith that is da'if, as is here, but there is a support for it that is sahih. Then this hadith becomes upgraded. He becomes upgraded to Hasan. He becomes upgraded to Hasan. However, he is not Hasan by himself. He is not Hasan by himself. Another hadith makes him Hasan. By himself he is da'if. But because there's a sahih hadith that supports him, he now goes into the category of Hasan. So because he was upgraded, and that upgrade we refer to as li ghayri. Li ghayri. Li ghayri means he became Hasan because of another one. And the one who could make him Hasan has to be stronger than him. So here, that is what's happening with this hadith of Ibn Abbas about the 4 rakats Nabi Sallallahu made before the Jumu'ah Salah. By itself it is da'if, but there are shawahid, these other hadith that supports this. Because what is the thing that is looked at here is that Nabi Sallallahu made 4 rakats before Jumu'ah Salah. Now, there is the hadith of 4 raka'ats before Dhuhr Salah. So, Jumu'ah is like Dhuhr. So, this is a Sahih hadith. So, this hadith supports it. The hadith of Ibn Mas'ud making 4 raka'ats before also supports this, because this hadith says Nabi Sallallahu made 4 raka'ats. He also made 4 raka'ats. So, where does he get this practice from? Except that he had seen Nabi Sallallahu do it. Then the hadith of between the 2 adhan and iqam, and the hadith before every fard salah. So all of these sahih hadith strengthens this hadith so that it becomes hasan li ghayri. It's no longer considered to be da'if. All right. Then number 5, inshallah we will hopefully finish this discussion, and then we'll be basically done with Jumu'ah Salah. I hope you're learning something, because we're going, I hope so. And Ibn Umar radiallahu anhu, again here comes this. Ibn Umar, now remember, he says about the 2 rak'ahs Nabi Sallallahu made after the Jumu'ah Salah. So Ibn Umar radiallahu anhu, he reports another hadith, and says, أنه كان يطيل صلاة قبل الجمعة ويصلي بعدها ركعتين في بيته. The practice of Ibn Umar radiallahu anhu. The practice of Ibn Umar radiallahu anhu. What was his practice? So this is not him reporting what he saw Nabi Sallam do. This is him. This is a report of what he used to do. All right. أنه كان يطيل صلاة قبل الجمعة وصلى بعدها ركعتين في بيته وحدث أن رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم كان يفعل ذلك. His practice was he would make salah before Jumu'ah Salah. He would make yutilu, meaning that he would make long salah. Why? Because they were waiting. It would be zawal, the time for Jummah would come in, but then they would have to wait for the imam to come. So he would take his time and make salah until the imam came. He would take his time. Yutilu salata means that he would make long salah. He didn't hasten and make quick. He didn't make his. Now, what is quick salah? What is quick sunnah salah? Quick sunnah salah is actually when in your first raka'ah you read Qul ya ayyuhal kafirun, and in your second raka'ah you read Qul huwallahu ahad. That is quick salah. Now that is also long salah. That was their quick salah. So when it says yutilu, then it means that he read more than Qul ya ayyuhal kafirun and Qul huwallahu ahad in his salah. And he would take his time in his ruku, and he would take his time in his sujood. So this was to indicate that he took his time making the salah before the fard salah of Jumu'ah. And after the Jumu'ah salah, he would go home, and then he would make 2 raka'ats of salah at home also. He would 2 raka'ats of salah at home also. And then he said, Kana Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam yaf'alu hakadha. I am doing this because this is what I saw Rasulullah do. So he did, this is the hadith of Ibn Umar. So in this case, the number of raka'at of salah before the Jumu'ah salah is not specified. It just specifies that he made before. Right? So he had before, but the number is not specified. And then after he had 2. But that was at home. And he said that this is what I saw Nabi Sallam do. Now the question is, he did this. It doesn't say that he made those 4 raka'ats at home or he made it in the masjid. It is very possible that the salah that he made before the Jumu'ah salah, he made it in the masjid, because otherwise, talatkum, as the masjid full. So it could be that he came early and then he was engaged in sunnah salah before the imam went and started with the khutbah, because once the imam starts with the khutbah, we shouldn't make salah. We shouldn't make salah. But ons gaan nou op 'n hadith afkom, but daai questionable maak. Alright? So Ibn Umar, now you see here, he made 2 raka'ats afterwards at home, and he said that Nabi Sallam used to do so, because this ties in with what happens here. This ties in with what happens here, that he said, he reports like this, the hadith after Jumu'ah, Nabi Sallam used to make 2 at home. And the next hadith, which is F, number 6. Alright? An Jabir ibn Abdullah radhiyallahu ta'ala an, قال جاء رجل والنبي صلى الله عليه وسلم يخطب الناس يوم الجمعة. A man came into the masjid whilst Nabi Sallallahu was already busy giving khutbah. So Nabi Sallam had gone, the adhan was made. So Nabi Sallam came into the masjid, Nabi came onto the mimbar, Nabi Sallam greeted, adhan was made. Then Nabi Sallam got up again and Nabi started making the khutbah. Then a man came into the masjid. فقال, then Nabi Sallam called that man and said to him, As-salayta ya fulan? Did you make salah? Did you make salah? Now, generally, when the khutbah starts, you don't make salah, because then you are supposed to listen. But in this case, Nabi Sallam was making khutbah and the man came in. Nabi Sallam called him and asked him, did you make salah? Because Nabi Sallam saw him coming in. Because when Nabi Sallam is standing, making the khutbah, the other people are sitting. Nabi Sallam can obviously see who's coming in. Like in my case also, when I stand on the mimbar, I can see who's coming in. I can see who's sleeping. I can see who's doing what. I can see who's busy on their phones. I can see who's talking. I can see who's laughing. I can see everything. It's a nice view here from the thing. I can see all of that stuff, you see. Alright? So Nabi Sallam asked him, As-salayta ya fulan? Did you make salah? Qala, la. He said, no, I didn't, because the Jumu'ah must know anal. Then Nabi Sallam said to him, Qum farka. Now get up. Because he went to go sit down. He came in and sat down. Nabi Sallam asked him, come here, It is salah Ahmad. He said, no. And this is in the khutbah. And Nabi was busy doing the khutbah. It doesn't, we should not, as we did with the rulings of the khutbah, you don't unnecessarily speak other than the things that is supposed to be contained in the khutbah. This is the Rasul of Allah, obviously. You understand? So there are certain khususiyat. There are certain things Nabi Sallam could do that nobody else can do. Certain Nabi Sallam could do that nobody else could do. Like in terms of nikah, the maximum any other person get married to is 4. Nabi Sallam had more than 4 wives. You understand? So there were certain things that were permissible to Rasulullah Sallam because Nabi Sallam needed those things needed to be able to do those things in order to teach us the deen. So Nabi Sallam said to him, Kum farka raka'atain. Alright? So get up and make 2 raka'ats. In another narration for the same hadith, it adds the words, wa khaffif, make it quick. Get up and make 2 rak'ats, but make it quick. Alright? So here, the hadith from Jabir. Now, Jabir is also a very prominent narrator of hadith. Jabir Abdullah, I don't know if I mentioned him before, very interesting story about him when he got married. So, he was the only person, Nabi Sallam went to Uhud, his father Abdullah got martyred, they came back. Then the Quraysh came back. Nabi Sallam said, all those who were at Uhud, you must come out again. So because his father became martyred, he was a youngster. Initially he wasn't part. So he said, oh Nabi of Allah, my father was martyred, so allow me to come in his place. And Nabi Sallam permitted him. So he was the only youngster that went out with Nabi Sallam, and Nabi Sallam went out for the second time. Then on another expedition, when Nabi Sallam came back, so shortly thereafter, Nabi Sallam saw that he had yellow stains on his hands and his clothing. So Nabi Sallam asked him, what is die vlekke hier op jou? So he said, oh Nabi of Allah, I got married. So Nabi Sallam asked him, Bikran am Thayyibah, a young girl or a lady that was married before? He said, Thayyibah. He said, no, I got married to a lady that was married before, and he was a youngster. Because initially he wasn't even allowed to go into the battle. So he was about 15, 16 years old at this time when he got married. Understand? So Nabi Sallam told him, Halla Bikran. Kom hier, jong meisie nie man. Tal abu biha wa tal abu bik. Allahu Akbar. Then you can play with her and she can play with you. Subhanallah. Huh? So he said, oh Nabi of Allah, you know my father passed away. And I've got, I think he said 7, some narration says 4, some narration says 7 sisters. And they are all younger than what I am. And my mother had already also passed away, and now my father had passed away. So I got married to a lady that was more mature so that she could help me take care of my sisters. Because I disliked bringing a young girl, limithlihinna, who was similar to them, into the house. Because now I get married to a young girl, young meisies by mekaar, moeilikheid. You understand? It's moeilikheid. So he got married to a more mature lady so that she could help him to raise his sisters. Could help him look after his sisters. But be that as it may. So, and he says that about the person, Nabi Sallam instruct. So, Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, so Nabi Sallam instructed this man to make 2 raka'ats, and this was before the Fard Salah, because this was Nabi Sallam was making the khutbah, and Nabi Sallam told him, get up, make 2 raka'ats, but make it quick. In other words, don't, while I'm making khutbah now, because this wasn't the normal practice, but there's commentary on this hadith. وجاء هذا الحديث مفسرا في رواية ابن ماجه عن أبي هريرة رضي الله عنه. Alright. So there's a story behind this hadith. And the story behind this hadith is narrated by another companion of the Prophet Abu Hurairah, another prolific narrator of hadith. And in another book of hadith it is contained. And he says, جاء سالك غطفان ورسول صلى الله عليه وسلم يخطب. A person from the tribe of Ghatfan, he came. So he was a new Muslim, He was a new Muslim, and he came to see Nabi Sallam regarding a particular need or a condition of his tribe. And he came into the masjid when Nabi Sallam doing the khutbah. قال له رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم أصليت ركعتين? Have you made 2 raka'ats? Have you made 2 raka'ats? This was before the Fard Salah. قبل أن تجيء? Before you came to sit down, you entered the masjid, but before you sat down, did you make 2 raka'ats of salah? قال لا. He said, no, Rasul of Allah, I did not. قال فصلي ركعتين وتجوز فيهما. A similar narration. Nabi Sallam told him, now make 2 raka'ats, but make it very quickly. ووجه دلالة في هذه الروايات. Okay, so ulama say, so in this here was an instruction from Nabi Sallam that he should make 2 raka'ats to indicate that. Now, from amongst the commentators say that because he came, if we join between the 2 hadith, the hadith of Abu Hurairah, that he came, Saliku Ghatfan, which means he came for a need. Salik means a person that's looking for something, that's seeking something. So he came with a need. So the reason Nabi Sallam had him stand up again after he sat down in order to make 2 rakats of salah was so that the remainder of the Sahaba should see him. So that after that, when Nabi Sallam addressed him regarding his need and the need of his tribe, so that they should assist him, they would be able to identify him. So that Nabi Sallam could make it known to the Sahaba that this person, he came for a need and came for. But the point being that if there was no such thing as 2 raka'ats sunnah before the Fard Salah of Jumu'ah, Nabi Sallam would not have instructed him to make it. Nabi Sallam would not have instructed him to make it. So the mere fact Nabi Sallam instructed him is an indication that you can and also probably should make 2 raka'ats before the Fard Salah. So the conclusion of all of these ahadith are the following. في هذه الرواية أن قول النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم قبل أن تجيء يدل على أن ركعتين السنة الجمعة قبلية وليست سنة تحية المسجد. So he says that from this hadith we understand that Nabi صلى الله عليه وسلم asked him, قبل أن تجيء, before you came here, because before you came here can mean that you entered the masjid before you came. Not so this relates to salah that you could make at home. This refers to salah that could be made at home. And the only salah that you could have made at home is the 2 raka'ats before the Fard Salah, because Tahiyatul Masjid you can only make in the masjid. To show that the sabab, taji'ah, before you came in. Did you make 2 raka'ats before you came in? Is to indicate that, like how for Dhuhr Salah you can make your 2 raka'ats Dhuhr Salah at home. You can make 2 raka'ats. Like for example, in my case, I stay in Belha. So my habit is that Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, we learn from the hadith, used to make the sunnah salah of Fajr at home and then come to the masjid. Now there, alhamdulillah, I stay just around the corner from the masjid. Die iqama kan afgaan, dan kan ek nog takbir ula kry. As die iqama staat en ek loop van die huis af, dan kry ek nog takbir ula. But there, they allow 15 minutes before the start of the Fard Salah. Between the adhan and the Fard Salah is 15 minutes. Now the habit there is, when Fajr is after 6 o'clock, then they only allow 10 minutes. When Fajr is before 6 o'clock, then they allow 15 minutes. Longer time. So when it is 15 minutes, then I stay at home, I wait for the adhan to finish, then I make my 2 raka'ats of Fajr at home, and then I go to the masjid. And when I come to the masjid, I still have enough time to make 2 raka'ats Tahiyatul Masjid. So in this way, I'm able to make 4 raka'ats before Fajr Salah. But you cannot come in when the adhan is gone and make 4 raka'ats before Fajr. There's no allowance for 4 raka'ats. For example, there's 15 minutes. The adhan goes and they've got 15 minutes. Then you can't make Tahiyatul Masjid and then also 2 raka'ats of Fajr. Then you only make 2 raka'ats of Fajr, because in your Tahiyatul Masjid is included in the Fajr, because between the adhan and the Fard Salah of Fajr, there's only 2 raka'ats of Salah. There's no 4 raka'ats. So you cannot make Tahiyatul Masjid. Then your Sunnah Salah of Fajr also becomes your Tahiyatul Masjid is included in there. And if you miss that also, and you just join the Fard Salah of Fajr, then your Fard Salah of Fajr also becomes your Tahiyatul Masjid. So the fact that Nabi Sallam asked him before you came indicates that this was not Tahiyatul Masjid, because otherwise Nabi Sallam would have only told him, you have entered the Masjid, you must make 2 rak'ats of Salah. But before he came, the only Salah he could make at home was his 2 rak'ats of Jumu'ah Salah. Alright, then there's another hadith. Okay, this discussion here is basically about this joining of Jumu'ah and Dhuhr. Alright? أن وقت صلاة الجمعة هو وقت صلاة الظهر. That the time for the Salah of Jumu'ah is the time of Dhuhr Salah. فَتَكُونُ سُنَنُهَا كَسُنَنِ الظُّهْرِ. So therefore the sunan of Jumu'ah is the same as the sunan of Dhuhr Salah. وَهَذَا مَا جَعَلَ الْبُخَارِيُّ رَحِمَهُ اللَّهِ يَقُولُ فِي صَحِيحِهِ. So Imam Bukhari rahimahullah, in his magnus opus, his book kitab, you know, what is it generally referred to as the Sahih of Imam al-Bukhari, he's got a bab. He's got a bab in there, in which he says, Babu Salati Ba'da al-Jum'ati wa qablaha. The bab, or the chapter that deals with the Salah before Jumu'ah, in other words, before the Fard Salah of Jumu'ah, I mean after the Fard Salah and before. Now he brings after first. Now why after first? Because of this hadith. Not that one, this one here. That Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam instructed 4 raka'ats after Jumu'ah. Alright? And because the hadith that relates to the 2 raka'ats, or the salah before, the only one that specifically states is this hadith of Ibn Umar radiallahu ta'ala an, that Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam made 4 or made salah before Jumu'ah. But this is, as I mentioned, it is Musa, Ibn Abbas rather, but that is a weak hadith. And the one of Ibn Umar is his practice, which he says he took from Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. Ibn Mas'ud is his practice, which he took from Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. It is not a specific statement of Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam saying that you must make that sunnah salah before the time. That's why he brings qabla after. ثم ذكر حديث ابن عمر رضي الله عنه أن رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم كان يصلي قبل الظهر ركعتين وبعدها ركعتين وبعد المغرب ركعتين. And then he brings a hadith, which is a very strong hadith, reported by Ibn Umar radiallahu anh, but it refers to all of the sunnah rawatib, which is connected to the 5 times daily salah. So he doesn't bring anything specific for Jumu'ah, because these ahadith does not mean that if Imam Bukhari does not bring a hadith that it is not sahih. We also understand how Imam Bukhari's book works. Just because he doesn't bring a hadith specifically for a particular subject doesn't mean that there isn't a sahih hadith for that. It simply means that the hadith does not meet his requirements, because he had very strict requirements. Alright? So he then brings a hadith that deals with the general, what sunnah salah is for Fajr, what sunnah salah is for Dhuhr, for Asr, for Maghrib, and Isha, to indicate that Jumu'ah is the same as Dhuhr. So the sunnah salah of Jumu'ah is also the same as the sunnah salah for Dhuhr. فالإمام البخاري رحمه الله تعالى يرى جمعة كظهر, because Imam Bukhari's opinion was that Jumu'ah Salah was the same as Dhuhr Salah. مع أن ابن عمر رضي الله عنهما ذكر ركعتين بعد الجمعة ولم يذكر شيئا قبلها, فرأى إمام البخاري أن ما قبل الجمعة وما ذكره ابن عمر قبل الظهر. So Imam Bukhari, so there is this hadith of Ibn Umar making 2 rak'ah, mentioning Nabi Sallam 2 rak'ahs in Nabi Sallam's house. And he does not mention specifically 2 rak'ahs before. This mentions his practice, this hadith mentions his practice. But it does mention 2 rak'ahs before Dhuhr Salah. So Imam Bukhari says that Dhuhr and Jumu'ah is the same. So therefore, because he mentions 2 rak'ahs before Dhuhr Salah, it is understood that he also made 2 rak'ahs before Jumu'ah Salah. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best. So may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us all tawfiq. And that concludes our discussion regarding the sunnah salah before and after Jumu'ah Salah. Any questions regarding this? So kan my exam paper opset. Any questions regarding this? The next discussion that I actually want to start next week, inshallah, because Jumu'ah Salah is a Jamaat Salah. I want to next week start with a discussion on the rules of Jamaat Salah. The general rules on Jamaat Salah. That we will start next week, inshallah. So for now, Jumu'ah Salah, as far as my dinges goes, is concluded. So is there any questions regarding the Jumu'ah Salah? Any questions regarding the Jumu'ah Salah? Jazakum Allah. Subhanallah wa bihamdi. Subhanakum bihamdi.